Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a nearly packed house, which is terrific. Welcome to the panel on the economic perspectives on the Middle East and North Africa at this, the inaugural Special World Economic Forum meeting here in Riyadh. And I am delighted to be joined by an absolutely stellar panel bringing together public and private sector voices for what is a key pivotal moment for the economic prospects for the Mena region. So let me introduce my panel first and foremost. Jihad Azor is the Director of the Middle East and Central Asia Department at the IMF. Fadel Jubeir is the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, member of the Council of Ministers here in the Kingdom and the Climate Envoy. Mohammed Al-Issis is the Minister of Finance at the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Ahmed Galal Ismail is the Chief Executive Officer at Majid Al Futtaim Holding in the UAE. And Karen von Hippel is the Director General of the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies. So welcome, all of you. Thank you for joining us. Let's dive straight into the conversation with a snapshot of the latest MENA regional economic outlook, thanks to Jihad and his team. It is a straightforward look at the MENA region's tough times, marked by the conflict in Gaza and Israel, compounded by issues like the Red Sea shipping troubles, oil production cuts, all of this piling into what are existing high debt levels and rising borrowing costs. The forecast, as I understand it, and we'll discuss this, sees growth nudging up to 2.7% in 2024 from a tight 1.9% last year. And by 2025, we are looking at a significant improvement from that to something like 4.2% as these challenges start to ease up. But caveat here, that's at least the assumption. It will come as no surprise to anybody in this room that there is a fair bit of uncertainty ahead with the ongoing conflict, its potential knock-on effects on trade and security, all issues that we will discuss in this next 40 minutes or so. That said, we are also seeing real pockets of economic resilience in this wider region, not least the impact of the GCC's push to diversify its economies beyond oil, including both public and private sector investment in and around this region. So we've got the public and private perspective on what is, I think it's fair to say, Jihad, an uneven outlook for this region. So can you, firstly, congratulations, it's a super comprehensive REO. Let's drill down a little bit more, if you will, and expand on the impact of this ongoing conflict in Gaza, the wider ramifications, and what you see as priorities for policy making now and going forward.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here in the Kingdom. Well, this year, it's a tale of two cities. It's a year of shocks and at the same time, a year of resilience. A year of recovery, but also a year of very slow growth. Year of high inflation in certain countries, but year of very well, managed inflation. Therefore, you can read the situation in different ways, which makes it very challenging to set the same set of policy recommendations for countries. But first, in time of resilience, you need to increase your buffers. And this is something that works for all countries. Mm-hmm. In times of shocks, you need to make sure that you have the right safeguards, especially at the social level. In times of also large transformations, it's not only the geoeconomic fragmentations that are going to reshape, but also the new opportunities for countries who could play the role of connectors. Saudi is trying to play the role of connectors. Therefore, we have several transformations that are taking place. Of course, the headline is more on the geopolitical tension, but there are different stories. Mm-hmm. You have the story of the new transformative sectors, AI, climate, mm-hmm. where investment is being made. You have the potential of the connectivity that is being created with Asia, China, India, Central Asia, Africa, that could create a potential. You have the journey of diversification for the GCC countries that have shown a resilience faced with several shocks since the COVID-19 and yet you still have level of growth that is between 4 to 4.5% on the non-oil sector. You have the resilience of the oil market with this huge level of uncertainty. The market of oil has been nervous for a few weeks and it has normalized. Therefore, it's very difficult to manage such a complex situation. For that, you have to be more sub-region specific and country specific at the same time. The last point that I want to highlight here is there is a short-term impact of conflict, but there is long-lasting impact of those type of events that we need to take into consideration. This is why we decided this year in our outlook to focus on two important files. One, the impact of conflicts, the long-lasting impact of conflicts, who appear to be higher in the region compared to other parts of the world, and trade, because we are strategically at the center of global trade. And it affects us not only because of revenues or because the countries who have ports on the Red Sea, but our future will be defined by our ability to connect with Europe, to connect with Africa, to connect also with Asia. And this is where, despite all the noise we see and the tension and the risks, we need to think about those priorities for the future.
Well, let's talk about conflict as a priority. And so let me come to you and very specifically on the conflict in Gaza at present. There are real concerns here and around the region about a protracted conflict that has already caused immense human suffering, both in Gaza and in Israel. The risk of that spilling over into the wider region still exists. As we speak, key stakeholders are here in Riyadh discussing how to put an end to the war and forge a path ahead. I know that you can't tell us whether or not Hamas will accept the current Egyptian plan tabled for a ceasefire and the release of hostages. That it doesn't lie in your file. But here in the kingdom, there is a real effort to ensure that there is an end to this conflict, a ceasefire, and then a plan for the day after. What can you tell us about that pan-Arab, sort of unified Arab plan for post-conflict Gaza? And how does Saudi normalization with Israel as an agreement fit in going forward? And is that a likelihood?
I think you pointed out the dangers of this, and conflict doesn't serve anything. It undercuts the ability to try to integrate the region and to unleash the economic potential of this region. Our region is a young region, a young population, very dynamic, tremendous natural resources, large capital base, strategic and very important geographic location. So all the elements for success and prosperity exist. And our objective is to link the region with the world and to be able to put the resources of the region together so we can create synergies that have a positive impact on all the inhabitants of the region. This is complicated by the tensions that we have in the region. So our objective is to try to put an end to these tensions so we can focus on the things that matter: economic development and prosperity. With regards to the situation in Gaza, our number one priority right now is to stop the fighting. Then the second priority is to ensure that if enough humanitarian assistance goes into the Gaza Strip so that we avoid starvation, we avoid disease, and we take care of the people there. And then, of course, in terms of long term, we need to find a way to end this conflict. And the only way we can end this conflict is by having a two-state solution. So we need to chart a clear, time-bound, irreversible path to a Palestinian state, so everybody knows where we're going. That's how we put an end to this. Saudi Arabia said in terms of normalization that this would be a part of it. The Arab world has had a position with regards to the Arab Peace Initiative. The United States supports this. The rest of the world supports this. We just need to make sure that we stop the fighting, increase assistance, humanitarian assistance going in, and then come up with a pathway towards a Palestinian state.
Are the parameters for a unified Arab plan clear at this point? And what does an irreversible path for Palestinians going forward, an irreversible path for Palestinians and a horizon for them? What does that look like at this point? Is it clear?
Yeah, this is something that the negotiators have to work the details on, and it has to do with different elements that have to be put together. But we know what the ultimate objective is, which is two states. Palestinian state on 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. We know this. This is enshrined in UN resolutions. This is enshrined in the Arab Peace Initiative. Now the question becomes, how do you do this, and in the process also ensure security guarantees for both states? How much time does it take? How do you build capacity? How do you, if you look at the Oslo Agreement, there was an agreement to go from areas from B to A and C to B, and then eventually from B to A. So you expand the authority of the Palestinian Authority so that you have a state. Now the issue here is how do we need to come up with a roadmap that has a timeline that is irreversible, so we know that we will get there if we take the steps that will lead us there.
Let me just press you. Do you have any confidence that Benjamin Netanyahu, as Prime Minister, and his right-wing government have got any interest in a two-state solution at this point? Because if that is the irreversible path towards peace and success and a Palestinian horizon, you have to have some confidence that this government will sign up.
I am not a mind reader, so I can't, nor am I a psychiatrist. That's not what I was educated to be, nor is that my profession. But what I can tell you is the interests of everybody in the region requires that we put an end to this conflict, and it requires that we move from conflict and war and destruction to development and creating prosperity and jobs for our youth and unleashing the potential of this region. It serves everybody to have an end to this conflict. The potential that can be unleashed is tremendous. That, along with all the other conflicts, but this is the longest conflict that has been in our region. And it's time that we find an end to it. And I believe that with goodwill, with seriousness, and with foresight, we should be able to move the ball across the goal line.
Well, we'll wait to see whether we get any further detail over the next 24 hours. Of course, Antony Blinken here tomorrow, and as I said, a lot of regional stakeholders plus Europeans in town as well. So let's see where we go on that. But the importance of this is, to your point, that we wanted to talk about, concentrate on conflict and on trade, and we'll further that discussion. Mohammed, Minister, we know there's a lot of uncertainty and risk in the economic outlook as laid out by Jihad. That may be precisely why we should be pushing ahead with reforms such as the ones that you've been carrying out in Jordan. Jordan's economy has been remarkably sort of resilient through certainly this last sort of period of conflict. Can you just explain what you're learning at this point with regard to policy making and what happens going forward?
I think positioning the question in terms of learning is spot on, frankly. Listen, the world now there's high intrastate polarization, there's interstate conflict. We're at an inflection point when it comes to AI, technology, biotech, what have you. The one certain thing anybody in this room can be certain of is uncertainty is here to stay. And therefore, as a policymaker, as a decision maker, I think top of your priority, as Jihad said, is how to invest in enhancing your buffers so that you can increase your resilience for when black swans, which have become the norm, unfold. Unfortunately, I've been a Minister of Finance during COVID, Russia-Ukraine, stagflation, high interest for longer, Gaza, and the most recent Iran escalation. Reality is decision makers cannot expect normal way of doing business to be the way forward. And the way we in Jordan have invested in enhancing our resilience, which paid off in protecting and shielding our middle class really from the global ramifications of what the whole world witnessed, is, I think, through multiple key learning steps. The first one is ownership matters. What we did it because we believe that's the right path for Jordan. with all due respect to the IMF or World Bank or others, they have been our absolute best advisors, but we didn't do it because the IMF thought that's the right path to go forward. And in fact, the IMF told us, if you don't believe that's the right path, it's not going to work. So that two-way partnership worked. Second, you have to do it in a socio-stable way. So it's very easy to enhance revenues by increasing marginal rates of taxation, but it doesn't last. You need to widen the tax base, you need to close the loopholes for evasion and avoidance, and you need to level the playing field across the board. Otherwise, you lose the credibility of pushing this forward. And third, timing matter. You must invest in building resilience before crises hit, not at the height of crisis, which is what is very easy as a decision maker to do. But I think it would be fatal to wait till you need to reform. And I think doing these three aspects of sequencing, ownership, and socio-stability has put Jordan in a matter of credibility with the markets and rating agencies. We maintained and safeguarded our rating since before COVID till today, despite of all the regional and international exogenous shocks. But that is necessarily but not sufficient. Ultimately, we have 70% of our population below 30. They deserve to see their hopes in a better life realized. And the unfolding events at the region has probably delivered everybody in this region their biggest deficit, the deficit of hope, of believing that tomorrow for our children will be better. And we must safeguard that before the worst hit, which is radicalization emerging from that hopelessness. And I think that's why what His Excellency said should be top priority. The Arab states have put a plan forward, it's very clear. The other party needs to understand that their future cannot function in vacuum of hopefulness.
How resilient are you should this conflict not end and spill over? A protracted conflict and a wider regional war. How resilient is the Jordanian economy at this point?
Listen, we've been resilient against all odds. We will continue to invest in building the buffers for resilience, but reality is this whole region will suffer and the whole world will suffer. Radicalization will impact every capital in the world if hopelessness remains the norm in this region. Reality is tourism will be impacted in the region. We're very hopeful about the renaissance taking place in the GCC, moving beyond hydrocarbon. I think the whole region stands to benefit from that. We're investing in that. Jihad pointed to the disruption to trade. That will affect everybody. You know, you can maintain resilience, but resilience is the foundation upon which you want to build growth and job creation, and we have a lot to conquer. We have youthful population. We still need to penetrate more participation for women in our workforce. We have to turn all the education that we've invested into better lives for our households. And none of that will happen if disruption of long-term plans continue to be the firefighting mode we function in as decision makers.
How disruptive has this current period been to your business? I mean, to the business of trade, which is the business that you are in. And you talk about a new Arab renaissance, and you very specifically point out, and this is a fantastic article you did recently for WEF on global megatrends, you specifically point to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Egypt as great opportunities for success going forward. Where are your biggest concerns at present?
So indeed, Saudi, the UAE and Egypt are the three largest economies in the region. Combined, they are of significant scale, and they do have significant momentum. I mean, if they were a trading bloc today, they would be the fastest growing trading bloc in the world post-COVID. The challenge that we have is it's a two-speed region. You have Saudi, trillion-dollar economy, the UAE with significant transformation. And one way to bridge the gap between the tale of two cities that Jihad is talking about is really more about economic integration. More free movement of goods, people, talent, data, capital, and that's where we're seeing a deficit. So the current disruption, as disruptive as it is, it actually exposes in a way the inherent weaknesses within the region. Intra-regional trade in Middle East, North Africa is anemic by any standard. In fact, it's the lowest level of any bloc anywhere in the world. It's at the highest level over the past decade or so, but it's still very low. So the current disruptions, in a way, expose that weakness, but also give us a pause, an opportunity to pause and reflect that actually by creating more opportunities for economic integration, we would create the resilience that is required to deal with the next crisis. But most importantly, we would start bridging that deficit of hope. The region, on pure math, should be $1 trillion larger in terms of GDP. And geopolitics aside, better integration, freer movement of people, talent, goods, trade, etc., will help unlock $1 trillion. And $1 trillion will be transformative for the people and societies of our part of the world. I think from a private sector point of view, we need to deal with the current short-term challenges, but we must not lose hope that this region is on the brink of potentially a new golden economic age, and we need to invest in the long term.
And it needs private sector investment, not to be crowded out, but to be crowded in order to do that. I mean, that's as...
And I think it's quite evident. It's quite evident in the Vision 2030. It's stated in black and white that private sector enablement is core to Vision 2030 in Saudi. Same in the UAE, more recently in Egypt as well. The government has made very clear commitment to enable the private sector to take on a bigger role in investment, development, etc. So I think it's about translating these high-level policy directives into action on the ground. It's also about the private sector leaning in and being very clear about what it can do and what the policy requirements are to actually increase private sector participation.
How do you avoid the crowding out of the private sector? I mean, so intent on generating investment into this country. And we've just seen the non-hydrocarbon sector reach 50% of GDP activity here, which is a remarkable achievement given where we were in 2016, just before the launch of this vision. But it's absolutely critical, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That you ensure that this is an economy open for the real investment by the private sector. Just explain to us what you are doing. What's been successful as far as policy making is concerned, and where do you still have work to do?
We have a strategy reflected in Vision 2030 that seeks to overhaul all aspects of our government: the economy, the social side, the public sector side. In terms of the economy, it's opening up new sectors for investment, whether it's mining, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, tourism, entertainment, recreation, all of these areas. Overhauling the public sector to make it more efficient, more transparent, so that we have best practices when it comes to laws and conflict disputes, resolving those, encouraging investments, domestic and external, in terms of our educational system, in terms of our healthcare system, in terms of our environment, in terms of our cities. All of this, it's a comprehensive package, and we have that as a strategy. That's our guiding star, and we are determined to move forward with this, and we will deal with the problems of the region as they come up, but it's not going to distract us from where we want to go. And what have we achieved as a result? Unemployment, which was fairly high, is now at historic lows in Saudi Arabia. The employment of women in Saudi Arabia, or the participation rates of women in the workforce, jumped from around 14% to the 37-38% within 5 years. It's incredible, the numbers. When we look at foreign investment coming into Saudi Arabia, it's very high numbers. When we look at companies that are being set up in Saudi Arabia, young, dynamic, entrepreneurial, technology-driven, driven by Saudi youth, young men and women doing these projects, it's incredible. So, and the sense of optimism that we have in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is through the roof. People are excited, they're energized, they see that they have the ability to realize their hopes, their dreams, and their ambitions. And we, in terms of a government, our role is to set the stage and allow them to be able to perform like this. And this also impacts on the private sector. We want to encourage Saudi companies to become not only be involved in terms of domestically, but also internationally. One point I want to mention, Becky, with regards to the Mena region. The Mena region is vast. But if you look at the subsection of it, which is the GCC, in the GCC, we have been able to integrate our economies. We have been able to have free trade. We have been able to have free movement of goods and services over the past 25, 30, 40 years, since the formation of the GCC. And what we have seen is numbers going through the roof with regards to traffic, with regards to investment, with regards to trade. Our hope is that we can expand this to include the rest of the Mena region and hopefully beyond.
But as Ahmed pointed out, there is room to unlock something like $1 trillion worth of GDP here, and so there's clearly a lot more work to be done. I just want to follow up. Halfway through this Vision 2030, and you're right to point out where these successes have been. We hear reports that some of the projects will need to be reined in. There is clearly a priority on spend. How do you ensure the continued momentum for foreign direct investment, for the projects that are working here? How do you ensure that you get the same sort of results here that you have had in this first half, this first half of...
You keep pressing forward, and you don't take your eye...
What do you do as far as policy is concerned, legislation and policy?
You don't take your eye off the ball, and you reassess, and you look at where you've made progress, and can you make more progress, and you look at where you have some delays, and you see how can I deal with those delays. And so this is natural. We have several hundred initiatives in Saudi Arabia as part of Vision 2030, and we have been very transparent about it. We talk about it, we publicize that, we publish the figures and in terms of where we are, and we have in most areas exceeded, if not all in most areas exceeded the goals that were established. For example, whether it involves public health, whether it involves quality of life, whether it involves foreign investment, whether it involves where we are on renewable energy, whether it involves incredible changes. And we are determined to continue along this path because we want to build a country that is diversified, that is inclusive, that is energetic, that is based on technology, that is that competes in the world, and that is part of the global trading system.
Let me come back to you, and Karen, I am coming to you. I haven't forgotten you there. I just want to just work off the back of this conversation, this narrative about further economic integration across this region and how we might unlock further opportunity. We are seeing a policy, industrial policy around the world, the US, China, Egypt, becoming more protectionist, not less. We are seeing, here in Saudi, we talk about Saudi first, and in the UAE, this came from, the clear narrative out of the States, America first. How concerned are you that as countries, and perhaps rightly so, put their economic interests at the forefront of their foreign policy to a certain extent, and it's the reason why this region needs to see de-escalation, not escalation? How important is industrial policy to your mind? And what's the challenge as you see, as it were, the rest of the world taking a more protectionist approach?
It's interesting. We had 2 days ago, two-day conference on industrial policy here in Saudi as we are opening our regional office. And we had a very interesting discussion. Look, first you need to accelerate the transformation. There are new sectors coming, technology, climate, and so on. This is very important. Accelerate structural reforms, because structural reforms will enable you, if you want to have an industrial policy or sectoral strategy, the way you want to name it, to have the enablers for that. Investing in human capital, investing in access to finance, investing in access to technology. Those are important issues. We were discussing this morning CBDC. This region is well off financially, but in terms of financial penetration, 40% of the people living in this region have bank account. In Southeast Asia, it's 80%. We're still one of the highest region in terms of cash utilization. Therefore, you need to accelerate those transformations in building the enablers, in doing what we call in our jargon structural reforms. 2, you need to correct. There are certain, not maybe in the case of the GCC, in certain other countries, you have some imbalances that you need to correct. That is high, and it's becoming very costly. Unless you address this, it's very difficult to have high level of growth. And without having good level of growth, it's very difficult to achieve inclusion. Inclusion is very important. The $1 trillion we are talking about, we can achieve it very easily by reducing the gender gap and access to market by half. To other EMs, we have $1 trillion in the next 10 years. If we keep on doing what Saudi did with women's participation in the economy and reach the average of G20, it's 1.6% annual growth additional only by doing this. Therefore, the low-hanging fruits are there. I think we need to look on how we deal with them. The way we deal with them is at three levels. One is at the country level. Nobody would replace what a Minister of Finance can do in terms of reform. Okay? Therefore, the work has to start at the country level, country by country level, giving a direction, providing a hope, and investing in the future. This is one. Two, at the regional level. We have the positive and the negative. We have the positive to expand. There is more integration. Size of the market can become more attractive. But also, we have 7 countries in conflict in the region. One of the most scarred regions in the world. If we don't address this through something that should be forward-looking, something that is unusual, equivalent to the big transformations, it's very difficult to really build the sustainable prosperity in the region. And this has to be addressed. You discussed this, but it has to be now thought of how we think the future. And also the international community has to be there. The international community has to help countries who are fragile or countries with high level of debt. This is our responsibility collectively. But also, the international community should not close the door for a region that is seeking more integration. And this is something that is going to be one of the main challenges of the future, is with this geoeconomic fragmentations, you don't want to have aspiring countries to prosperity and growth to seek doors shut because there is a big fight internationally.
Karen, I just want to get your perspective.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I just wanted to build on a few points that others have raised, and in particular to quote the late Donald Rumsfeld about his unknown unknowns of conflict. And so you talked a bit about spillover, you talked about short-term and long-term, and we don't always know how all these forces will interact. So Yemen has been deteriorating for a very long time, as you mentioned, in the region, and of course, I don't think many people predicted what the Houthis would do in terms of disrupting shipping. So I don't even think many people could have anticipated that and thought through how to build resilience into that. Then there's the long-term unknowns. If you think about the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, I'm not sure many people thought, well, maybe a decade later we'll have the so-called Islamic State, metastasized from botched post-conflict period. And so it's hard it's great to think about integration, it's great to think about progress, but if you have 7 countries still in conflict, you have Syria still has not been resolved, Libya, Yemen, now we have, of course, what's happening in Gaza. If we think through the worst case scenario, about a week ago, I woke up thinking that Iran and Israel might go to war. Iran already, as we know, launched 300 rockets, and then Israel responded, and I thought, holy, this is going to be really bad. If that is potentially the worst case scenario in the region, a lot of this stuff has to completely be thought through in a very different way. And so it's great that, that the IMF and others are trying to think through these various scenarios. But I just think we need to be as creative as possible about a range of scenarios. We always hope for the best, but you remember in the United States and Afghanistan, they didn't think through the worst case scenario of what would happen when they withdrew, and they know that now.
And I wonder whether we've sort of, worked the gaming theory through the worst case scenarios at this point, and I'm not sure that we have. Ahmed, you wanted to come in?
I mean, peace and stability are obviously indispensable for economic growth, but if we wait for peace and stability in our part of the world, we could be waiting for a long time. So we need to act, and from private sector perspective, we see opportunities independent from geopolitics and independent from the, I would say, the cruelty that we see in parts of the region. I'll give you one simple example: food. I mean, the region is a net importer of food. The food system is the 3rd largest economic contributor to the GDP of the region, after oil and gas and after infrastructure. And yet, because we don't have the right infrastructure to trade among ourselves, we don't have the right cold storage, we don't have common customs like the ones we have in the GCC across the broader region, the region wastes twice as much food as any other part of the world. In fact, we think from our own estimate that the amount of food wastage in the region is enough to feed perhaps a small country or the entire population of Gaza, just by reducing waste. And you think not just about the food wastage, but the energy, the carbon footprint on top of that. So it's very important for private sector actors to be very pragmatic, take the lead, and start what is needed to drive that economic integration, recognizing obviously that geopolitics are geopolitics.
What's standing in the way of better economic integration across this region? I see a lot of bilateral deals being cut. I mean, from the UAE's perspective, the CEPAs are clearly, working for the betterment of the economic story and vision there. And what's getting in the way, and what needs to happen next?
I think that's probably a question that's best addressed to their excellencies from a policy perspective.
I want to hear it from your perspective, actually. But go on, sir.
It's very nice of the private sector to turn the hard question to the government. Listen, I think the private sector needs to take the leadership in forcing everybody to listen to their needs. Because frankly, one thing everybody accepts in this region is the jobs will be created in the private sector, the hopes will be built in the private sector, and therefore our job as policymaker is to cater to their needs, to bring down the barriers that we're facing. There is plenty to be done in removing barriers to entry. But also our markets have traditionally developed a protectionist mind of policy, which needs to be really removed. As His Excellency said, we have a very vivid example here in the GCC, in the renaissance that integration is delivering. Jordan has the high human capital that it can serve the GCC market with. Historically, we've been exporting our people. We want to return the people and export their high human capital services. That's the future for us. It's lower cost for the GCC. It's better income for Jordan. I think there is a need to go beyond our past and to really think of the future. I think the region has what it takes to make that transition. And if we wait for the geopolitics to resolve themselves, it will be too late. I think the economic well-being of our people can be the driver for change. If we provide our youth, if we really stop standing in their way, what the private sector, what our youth, what our women need is not for the government to cater to them, but rather to stop standing in their way. And that's the path forward for all of us.
Thank you. I know that you talk about sort of the global mega trends and the importance of action in this region by states to ensure that they are on and ahead of their game, as it were. And we're talking about AI tech, global trade. I mean, there are, and I'm sure these are all very familiar to you. What do governments need to do to ensure that they are sort of keenly focused here? I mean, I'm seeing where Saudi is headed as far as AI and technology is concerned. I see a similar sort of story of incubation of business in the UAE, for example. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the private sector has a big role to play, not just in terms of leading investments, but also engaging positively with policymakers and being very clear about the requirements and priorities. And we are indeed perhaps on the start of a cognitive revolution with AI. And yet, as we stand at the cusp of that revolution, most STEM graduates from the region look to further their career outside the region. And one positive example of that dialogue that leads to better outcomes is one that we've had both with the Jordanian government and the Egyptian government about setting up for our own business centers of excellence for technology, analytics, now AI in Amman and Cairo. And in doing so, we were able to generate great ideas about incentives, about policy reform, that on the back of that, we're now seeing global companies setting up their significant centers of excellence for data and analytics and AI in Amman, Jordan, Cairo, Egypt, and elsewhere. So I think dialogue is necessary. I think the other point that's important, it's important actually to highlight the good cases. I think in the region, because of the state of affairs, we're sometimes dominated by stories of suffering and stories of misfortune
Which exists.
which exist
Yeah.
and need to be addressed and need to be, dealt with. But at the same time, there's plenty of examples of breakthrough innovation. For the first time ever, we've seen a global tech company leading AI invest in a regional business. That happened a few days ago with Microsoft and
G42.
G42. That's outside. And I think we need to amplify that, and we need to make sure that these stories are receiving their fair share of airtime.
No,
Becky,
good point.
can I
Yes, go on.
jump in here? Because I think no one's waiting for geopolitics to resolve. I think a positive thing to say about this region is the resilience in times of uncertainty. I mean, there's been a conflict in several countries in this region for several decades now, and yet countries are investing and they're thinking through new approaches, et cetera. So I think that the resilience is actually very important, and the uncertainty you mentioned earlier is only going to get worse. I mean, we don't know what will happen in the US elections. We don't know where technology is taking us. We don't know how these conflicts are going to end. And in some ways, the fact that you can keep investing in building, you still have, what, 15% of your population are Syrian refugees, right? And Lebanon has 20 or 25%. So the fact that these countries have been able to push through despite that is actually a positive sign.
Let me just ask you, because it's absolutely up your on your file. Have we gamed out the worst case scenarios at this point?
So I think that needs to be done more in governments. I mean, yes, people at think tanks and universities think through, but I'm not sure we think through in the worst ways. I think government and the private sector are the ones that really need to be thinking through that in much more detail, because I don't think that we then say, okay, if this happens, then what do we all do to manage this? And maybe it needs to happen with government and private sector together.
This is happening. This is happening. It's part of natural process of planning. What we have done in Saudi Arabia is we set the objective, and we work towards that objective, and then we refine our policies as we move forward to make them more efficient and to be more resilient to any kind of disruptions that happened, as we've seen. And like I mentioned, we were able to reduce unemployment, increase participation of women in the workforce. We were able to increase foreign investment, increase the number of tourists coming into Saudi Arabia. Tourism, both domestic and from outside Saudi Arabia, has gone up tremendously. Investment has come up. So it's working, and we are looking in terms of integration to connect the grids of the region. We're looking to connect with Europe. We want to be able to supply electricity produced from renewable energy to satisfy the demand of Europe for electricity. So we're thinking about these issues, and we're putting them in place, and we're signing agreements with different countries, Greece, for example, on this issue, so that we build towards it. And of course, when a problem emerges, you have to deal with it, but it doesn't sidetrack you from your main objective. And it has to be a constant reassessment, but the objective is, this is where we want to go, and we will work towards this.
It's not just legislation and policy making in individual countries here, but for example, the CFIUS legislation in the States prevents, a country like Saudi actually doing business with not necessarily countries in the States, but countries outside of the States as well. So I mean, that's a tough deal to introduce into the kind of wider story here. I mean, how much more difficult is an economic vision when you're not just dealing with changes, significant reform to your own policy and legislation making?
I think the CFIUS also is mainly in terms of acquiring technologies in sensitive areas. And this is an area that we are in discussions with the United States. Most countries try to protect their sensitive technologies, and our perspective is that this encourages trade, encourages investment, and helps everybody, and it's a dialogue. And I think so far we've made good progress in this area, and we hope to continue to make more progress in this area. The key is also you need to have leadership, and your leadership has to have vision, and it has to be bold. And we have that. And so you need to have a plan, and we have that in terms of Vision 2030. And you need to have the ability to execute, which is build your human capacity in order to do this. And we are doing this in Saudi Arabia. And this is something that has the focus of our leadership.
The impact of decisions made here and around the region, obviously, you know, very, very clear. The impact of decisions made elsewhere on this region, you know, have become much clearer, certainly, again, over the last 200 days. And Jed, I want to just leave the last few minutes. I mean, we haven't got the last few minutes, we've got the last few seconds, but take the last couple of minutes, if you will, just to sum up.
Well, one, the region has higher voice internationally. For example, the Saudi are chairing the IMFC, the UAE is chairing the Development Committee. Therefore, the whole agenda globally now is being led by two countries from the region. Therefore, we have now more space to voice the region's issues, interests, and priorities globally. This is one. Two, the strategy of talking to partners and creating partnership is also something that maybe could bring not only business to the region, but also business within the region. Three, the state has to understand that its business is not to be in business. Its business is to be supporting the business. Private sector has to understand that unless you grow and you become a driver for the small and the smaller, it's very difficult to build impact as private sector. And the private sector has a role to play, has a social responsibility to play. The last point, I think, that we did not touch upon, social is very important for growth too. Inclusion is very important. You cannot grow an economy without really making sure that you have the right social framework that addresses people's issue, including those who cannot benefit from only growth. Therefore, yes, we know what needs to be done. We know that when you try, you can succeed. And I think the case of Saudi, especially in area where people were not expecting women participation in the economy, I think this is one of the best success stories that one can build on. Therefore, yes, we are in a very difficult moment. It's a defining moment. But again, I think, you know, we have been used to live in tough moments. But we have to believe that we can get something out of it. And I hope that despite all the desperate situation that we see, we can think the future and we can actively build the future, because it's not only about doing scenarios, it's about doing planning. And this is where we as an institution, we are trying to be partner. We have an office now in Saudi in order to support the region. We're trying to connect. And by doing so, we want to contribute to the ability of the region to thrive because we believe in it.
Jihad, I couldn't have done better myself. Thank you for winding up what has been an absolutely fascinating session. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed.